felt like this while studying the nervous system, especially the autonomic nervous system? Let me tell you a story to make things a little easier. Let's say that you go camping in Idaho. There's a lot of beautiful, beautiful country. There's mountains and streams and trees, and it's very, very peaceful. It's absolutely gorgeous. So let's say you go camping and you wake up and it's just a beautiful day. The air is crisp, clean, and beautiful. It smells great. You light a little campfire and you start cooking some eggs, add some potatoes, drink a little orange juice, fry up some bacon. And as you're crouched down by your campfire cooking, you hear a stick snap behind you in the woods. You turn your head a little bit using your peripheral vision and cranial nerve number 4, and you see a bear. Maybe a couple bear cubs, so it's a mama bear. And she's probably going to be unhappy. So what's the first thing that's going to happen? Your body is going to prepare itself to run away from the bear. Your pupils are going to dilate to let more light in so you can see where to run. Your skin's going to start to sweat profusely, and that's to keep you cool as you run down the forest trail to get away from the bear. Now, if you didn't sweat, you would overheat very, very quickly, pass out, and then you would be food for the bear. So it's important to sweat during a sympathetic response. What about all the bacon and OJ you've been chowing on? Well, you don't really need to digest all of that right now. So all of your stomach, your intestines, your mouth, everything in your GI tract is going to slow down. Blood pressure is going to increase. Not only is your heart beating faster, but your blood is being squeezed out of its normal volume into your muscles. The blood is leaving your GI tract, it's leaving your skin, which is why your skin is now pale, and all of that blood is being forced into your muscles, so blood pressure is going to increase dramatically. The smooth muscles of the lungs in the bronchi are actually going to relax, and that's going to let more air into the lungs. And your body does all of these things automatically in order to prepare you to either fight the bear or, more probably, run away from the bear. So this is a fight or flight response, known as a sympathetic response. And I want you to keep it in mind as we go through the rest of the lectures on this topic. Before we begin, I want you to make sure you've downloaded and either use online or print out the Autonomic worksheet that I've provided in the Week 14 folder and use it to take notes. So when we look at the somatic nervous system, this is not the autonomic. We're going back and reviewing the somatic for a moment here. This is controlling processes that we're conscious of. Sight, smell, hearing, equilibrium, those are all somatic sensory. And then somatic motor, of course, is using all the skeletal muscles to move our bones around with. Now, as opposed to the somatic nervous system, we have the autonomic nervous system. It's also called the automatic or visceral motor system. And this processes signals below a conscious level. So the brain is still in charge, but the brain is not aware of being in charge or not aware of any of the stuff that happens. We're going to transmit motor signals from the central nervous system to the heart, to smooth muscle, to glands, and we're also going to be picking up sensory info that we're not really normally aware of. Things like pressure in blood vessels and pH of the stomach. We need all of this in order to maintain homeostasis. A lower motor neuron of the somatic nervous system, so we're back to skeletal muscles again. Remember, we have an upper motor neuron that comes down from the brain, down through the spinal cord and synapses with the lower motor neuron. The lower motor neuron is going to have the cell body inside the anterior horn of the spinal cord. That axon is then going to leave out the anterior roots, go through the spinal nerve, and then go to some kind of somatic effector in the body, which could be a gland, usually going to be a muscle, so a neuromuscular junction. And our lower motor neuron is always going to release acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter, and acetylcholine is always going to be excitatory on neuromuscular junctions. As opposed to the somatic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system has a chain of 2 neurons that we're going to use for the lower motor neurons. In the somatic system, we have an upper motor neuron and a lower motor neuron. In the autonomic system, we have an upper motor neuron and then 2 what we would call lower motor neurons. In between the 2, we're going to have a synapse, And that synapse, since we're going from an axon onto a cell body for processing, needs to happen inside a ganglia. Remember, a ganglia is a collection of cell bodies outside of the central nervous system, and that's where we're going to have these synapses occur. So the first neuron of our autonomic nervous system, the first lower motor neuron, is going to be our preganglionic neuron, while the second one is going to be called the postganglionic neuron. So here's an example that might be a little clearer. With the somatic nervous system, we're going to have our upper motor neuron come on down through the white tracts here of the spinal cord and synapse on a lower motor neuron cell body inside the anterior horn of the spinal cord. That axon is then going to go out directly to a neuromuscular junction. The autonomic system, we have lower motor neurons. There's two. There's a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. They synapse together inside of a ganglia, which is a collection of neuron cell bodies outside of the central nervous system. The preganglionic neuron has its cell body inside the anterior horn of the spinal cord, whereas the postganglionic neuron has its cell body inside of the ganglia itself. Now, with the autonomic nervous system, the preganglionic axon is always going to release acetylcholine. The postganglionic axon, however, is going to release either acetylcholine or another neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. Now, the advantage to using two neurons instead of just one for the autonomic nervous system is that it allows for both convergence and divergence. So if there's only one axon, then it goes from point A to point B and that's it. But if we have a chain of two neurons, then we can start splitting the signal or pulling the signal in from several sources. Now, the autonomic nervous system is controlled by the brain, of course, and the spinal cord. The hypothalamus is part of the brain that is crucial to control of the autonomic nervous system. There's nuclei inside of the hypothalamus. Remember, collections of cell bodies inside of the central nervous system. And the hypothalamus is essential for processing emotions and deciding which way the autonomic nervous system is going to go, such as fight or flight or resting and digesting. Different areas of the brain, including the cortex, the thalamus, the limbic system, are all going to have input into the autonomic nervous system. Here is the hypothalamus. It sits down below this region here called the thalamus. And then the pink area here is the brain stem. It controls a lot of the reflexes through the autonomic nervous system. And then finally, the spinal cord does contain some nuclei for the autonomic nervous system. Now, when we look at the autonomic nervous system, it basically functions in two different ways. The parasympathetic division is also known as resting and digesting. It is used for conserving energy, replenishing nutrients, and generally chilling out. The sympathetic division, on the other hand, is the fight or flight. It's preparing the body for an emergency. So if we look at the differences in the lower motor neurons, so going back to the structure of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic division is going to come from both the cranial and the sacral regions of the body, so we tend to call it the craniosacral division. And the preganglionic neurons are either going to be inside of the brainstem or all the way down into the sacral 2 through 4 spinal cord segments. The preganglionic axons of the parasympathetic system tend to be very long, and the postganglionic axons really short. And that's going to mean that the ganglia are very close or sometimes actually within the walls of the effector organ. The preganglionic axons don't have very many branches in the parasympathetic system. In the sympathetic system, this is going to come from what we call the thoracolumbar division of the spine. The preganglionic neurons are all going to come from the lateral horns of the spinal cord in the T1 to L2 region. The preganglionic axons tend to be very short in the sympathetic division, and the postganglionic axons are long. So this is completely opposite of what we had in the parasympathetic. The ganglia are going to be very close to the spinal cord, either lateral or anterior to it. And the preganglionic axons tend to have lots of branches. So again, our parasympathetic division has a cranial and a sacral origin. The preganglionic fibers tend to be very long, with the postganglionic fibers very short, which means that the ganglia are very close to the organs. And then the sympathetic division comes from the thoracolumbar regions, T1 through L2, the lateral horns of the spinal cord. And the preganglionic fibers tend to be very short, and the postganglionic fibers tend to be very long, meaning the ganglia are very close to the spinal cord itself. When we look at the functions, again, the parasympathetic activity is fairly localized. It also tends to be fairly short-lived. Sympathetic activity, on the other hand, often facilitates what we call mass activation. So lots of things all kind of flip over to the sympathetic side fairly easily. And the sympathetic response tends to last for a lot longer than the parasympathetic does. Sympathetic stimulation will also cause release of adrenaline or epinephrine from the adrenal medulla.